When I moved into the neighborhood, I knew I'd have to deal with the typical quirks of an HOA. The rules about lawn height, paint colors, and trash can placement were already strict enough to make anyone roll their eyes. But I told myself I could handle it. After all, I wasn't moving here for the HOA was moving for the house itself, a charming little property with a wraparound porch, a big oak tree shading the yard, and a quiet street that promised peace after years of apartment living. At first, everything was fine. I minded my own business, paid my dues, and did my best to keep my property neat enough to avoid attention. But soon enough, attention found me anyway. In the form of Karen Garden, Karen wasn't officially the head of the HOA. She didn't hold any elected title, but you wouldn't know it by the way she carried herself. She prowled the sidewalks daily, clipboard in hand, making notes about everyone's property. She was the first to knock on your door if your grass grew half an inch over regulation, first to send a nasty email if your trash can lingered on the curb for too long, and the first to gossip at meetings about who wasn't fitting the neighborhood aesthetic. I had already had a few run-ins with her over minor nonsense, like the color of my porch light bulbs and the placement of my recycling bin. But I chalked it up to her being another meddling neighbor. That was before the mail started disappearing. The first time I noticed, I didn't think much of it. The package I'd ordered online never arrived, even though the tracking information said it had been delivered. I figured it was a mistake by the carrier, or maybe the box had been stolen by some passerby. A week later, a bill I was waiting on failed to show up. Then one morning, I found a torn envelope in the grass near the edge of my yard, addressed to me, but opened and empty. That's when my suspicion grew. Mail theft wasn't just inconvenient.
Ow.
It was a federal crime. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe kids had grabbed it as a prank. Maybe the mailman had dropped it. I tried to rationalize every possibility that didn't involve my neighbors deliberately stealing from me, but the pattern kept repeating. Letters vanished, small packages never made it to my porch, and envelopes that should have contained checks arrived already torn. The strangest part was how selective it seemed. Junk mail, catalogs, and pizza coupons piled up just fine, but anything with personal information or value was suspiciously absent. That's when my frustration turned into anger. Someone wasn't just taking my mail at random. Someone was deliberately targeting me. At first, I confided in a couple of neighbors, hoping someone had seen something. Their reactions were telling. Most shrugged uncomfortably and avoided getting involved. One neighbor muttered, "Well, you know how Karen is," before quickly changing the subject. That comment stuck with me. Why mention Karen? What did she have to do with this? Karen had always been nosy, but I had assumed her obsession stopped at yard maintenance and HOA rules. The thought that she might actually be opening my mailbox felt too absurd to believe. But the more I considered it, the more it made sense. She lived directly across the street, giving her a perfect view of my driveway. She was outside constantly, patrolling the neighborhood under the guise of keeping it safe. And she had already made it clear that she considered me an outsider who needed to be kept in line. The possibility gnawed at me. The breaking point came when I was expecting a birthday card from my mother. She had mentioned over the phone that she was sending me something with a small gift inside, nothing extravagant, but sentimental and thoughtful. When it never arrived, I felt that sinking certainty in my stomach. A few days later, while mowing the lawn, I spotted a crumpled envelope lying in the ditch near my driveway. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. The card had been ripped open, the gift gone. My jaw tightened, and for the first time I stopped doubting my suspicion. This wasn't random. This wasn't kids playing pranks. This was targeted, intentional theft. I had a very strong idea of who was behind it. Still, accusation without proof would get me nowhere. If I confronted Karen outright, she'd deny it, twist the story, and probably spin it into some absurd claim that I was harassing her. The HOA would back her up, they always did. I needed evidence, something undeniable that would expose her for what she was. So I decided to get creative. I started with a camera, nothing obvious, just a small, motion-activated one that I discreetly mounted near the porch, angled to capture the mailbox and the street beyond it. I didn't tell anyone, not even the neighbors I trusted. For a few days, nothing happened. The mail came on time, unbothered, and I wondered if maybe whoever had been taking it had moved on. But then, one sunny afternoon, the camera caught exactly what I had been waiting for. There she was, Karen in broad daylight, wearing her oversized sun hat and big sunglasses as though she thought they could disguise her. She walked across the street with feigned casualness, looked around once, then opened my mailbox and rifled through the contents. She pulled out a couple of envelopes, tucked them into her bag, and shut the box as if nothing had happened. Then, unbelievably, she turned and waved at me, or rather, at my house before strolling back across the street. I watched the footage 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. It was her, clear as day. The nerve of it stunned me. She wasn't sneaking around at night or hiding her actions. She was so confident, so sure that she was untouchable, that she didn't even bother to act discreetly. To her, my property, my privacy, even my federal mail-it, all meant nothing. Compared to her imagined authority as the self-proclaimed guardian of the HOA, I felt a mixture of outrage and grim satisfaction. It's outrage because she had crossed a line so deep it almost defied belief. Satisfaction because now, finally, I had the proof I needed. No more shrugging it off. No more being ignored at HOA meetings. No more wondering if I was imagining things. Karen had exposed herself, and the camera had caught every second of it. That night, I sat on the porch replaying the video on my phone, listening to the crickets chirp as the weight of it all settled on me. Karen thought she was in control. Thought she could harass me, sabotage me, and steal from me without consequence. But she had made mistakes. She had underestimated me. And with the evidence I now had, I realized I had the power to turn the tables in a way she would never see coming. For the first time since the mail had started disappearing, I felt calm. Not because the problem was solved, but because the balance had shifted. I wasn't stumbling around in the dark anymore, second-guessing myself, or wondering if I was imagining things. I had proof. Real proof. Video evidence that showed Karen in her ridiculous sun hat and sunglasses, stealing from my mailbox like a petty thief. And the best part was that she didn't even know she'd been caught. She walked around the neighborhood the next day just as smug as ever, chin lifted, clipboard under her arm, waving at passers-by as though she was the neighborhood's queen. Watching her parade around while I carried the secret on my phone was almost satisfying enough. Almost. But the longer I thought about it, the more I knew that exposing her quietly wasn't enough. If I marched to the HOA board, or even the police, she'd deny everything. Spin it into some story about how she was checking for compliance, or worse, claim that I was harassing her with doctored footage. People like Karen didn't back down when confronted directly. They doubled down, made more noise, and twisted the narrative until you came out looking like the villain. No. If I wanted to stop her for good, I needed to hit her where it hurt most. Her pride. I needed to make her humiliation public and undeniable. So I started planning. My first move was practical. I upgraded my mailbox. The flimsy aluminum one was replaced with a reinforced steel box, the kind designed for rural routes where mail theft and vandalism were common. I locked it securely, but that was only the beginning. Hidden inside was the real surprise. I rigged up a harmless but highly effective deterrent, a motion-triggered die pack. The same type banks use for foiling robbers, except smaller and safe for personal use. Blue ink that wouldn't wash off easily. To top it off, I wired the handle with a low-voltage static shock mechanism. Nothing dangerous, but strong enough to jolt anyone who grabbed it without permission. The setup was simple, cheap, and most importantly, undetectable from the outside. To any passerby, my mailbox looked perfectly ordinary. But for Karen, it was a trap waiting to spring. I tested it a few times with gloves on to make sure it worked. When I was satisfied, I sat back, waited, and let Karen's arrogance do the rest. It didn't take long. Just 3 days later, while I was working in the garage, I heard the faint click of my mailbox opening. I set down my tools, grabbed my phone, and slipped quietly around the corner of the house. And there it was, the moment I had been waiting for. Karen standing at my mailbox, pulling it open with her usual nosy confidence. The die pack went off. With a sharp hiss, in an instant, her hands and arms were covered in a vivid, impossible to miss shade of blue. She shrieked in surprise, stumbling backward, dropping the envelope she'd snatched. As if that weren't enough, when she tried to slam the mailbox shut in panic, her hand gripped the handle, triggering the static shock. She yelped again, this time louder, flailing as though she'd been stung by a wasp. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. The best part? My camera caught everything. The look of shock on her face, the ink splattering up her arms, the comical little dance she did when the static zapped her. She scrambled across the street, clutching her stained hands to her chest, eyes darting around in terror, as if the whole neighborhood had seen her. And in a way, they had. My porch camera wasn't the only one. At least 2 of my neighbors had cameras of their own. And later they confirmed to me they'd caught the scene from different angles. The next day, the evidence of her crime was impossible to hide. Karen showed up at the HOA meeting with her, hands still faintly stained blue, no matter how hard she had tried to scrub. The ink clung stubbornly, bright around her cuticles and in the creases of her palms. She kept them stuffed in her pockets or hidden under the table. But every time she moved, the stain betrayed her. People whispered. They noticed. And when I stood up during the meeting, pulled out my phone, and played the video for everyone too. See, the room erupted. Gasps, laughter, even a few claps echoed around the room. Karen's face went scarlet. She sputtered excuses, claiming she was just checking for compliance or protecting the neighborhood. But the footage spoke for itself, her rifling through my mail, her panicked reaction when the trap went off, her ink-stained hands fumbling with stolen envelopes. For once, the board didn't rush to defend her. They couldn't. The evidence was too strong, too public, too humiliating to ignore. Instead, the HOA president cleared his throat awkwardly and announced that Karen would be stepping back from her volunteer duties effective immediately. From that day forward, Karen's reign of petty tyranny was over. The streets with her clipboard. She stopped knocking on doors to complain about trash cans and porch lights. And most importantly, she never so much as glanced at my mailbox again. Whenever we crossed paths, she avoided eye contact, her once smug expression replaced with a tight-lipped frown. For me, the victory wasn't just about protecting my mail. It was about reclaiming my peace. Every morning, when I walked down the driveway and opened my mailbox, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing Karen would think twice before messing with me again. The neighborhood, too, seemed lighter. People began waving more, chatting openly, no longer afraid of being reported for trivial infractions. It was as though Karen's humiliation had broken the spell she'd cast over everyone, and life returned. To normal, of course, the blue-stained hands became the stuff of neighborhood legend. For weeks afterward, people whispered about it at barbecues and block parties. Children giggled when they saw her, calling her Smurf hands behind her back. Even months later, when the dye had long since faded, the memory of her flailing in my driveway remained vivid in everyone's mind. For me, that was the sweetest revenge, not just the trap itself, but the lasting reminder that bullies like Karen were only as powerful as people let them be. In the end, I didn't need to press charges or call the police. The court of public opinion was harsher than any fine or citation. Karen had wanted to control the neighborhood, to dictate how everyone lived, to humiliate those she deemed unworthy. Instead, she became the subject of her own humiliation, marked literally and figuratively as the thief she was. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that I hadn't just stopped her from stealing my mail. I had shocked her into silence, and in doing so, I'd restored the peace she had stolen from all of us.